Professor Doherty could make complex issues that confront mankind today. And I think it's a great opportunity for our doctors and our select invited media to ask questions and take his perspective. We're in the middle of the H1N1 pandemic in the country, and it's been a matter of great concern to people at large, to policymakers. And as you yourself saw that you were made to fill up that form as you entered India at the airport. We're trying to do a few things, but there's a lot that remains to be done. Would you like to make a few opening comments?
I've been asked to make some opening comments. I've actually already spoken, so I guess, the challenges facing us in health and in the environment and in education, I think, are all interlinked. We don't separate ourselves off in one specific area. The issue of what's happening environmentally is related to human numbers, which is related to human health. Everything comes together in a sense, and I think we have to talk to each other. When I go back to Australia, I'm not only talking, I have a couple of talks that I have to give before I go out of the country again, mostly to scientists, but I'm also talking to an organisation called the World Parliament of Religions. And one of the reasons I accepted that was that I have the sense that unless science can talk to people of faith and different types of faith, given the distribution of religions and the people who are deeply embedded in religion throughout the world, then we're not going to get very far with some of the broad societal issues that we have to face. And so we've got to somehow get a broad dialogue going about these issues and get it in some way across into the area of evidence-based perception of what is happening. I heard a very interesting little story while I was at the Institute of Medicine recently, and I also heard a lot about this when I was in Canada, and that is to do with the melting of the Arctic and the effect that that is having on the Inuit, the Eskimo. And of course it's changing the habitat. Some of the species that they routinely hunt are moving further south as the north warms, and as it is warming very rapidly. The sea ice is thinner. Many of the cultural practices they've had, the hunting practices, the food gathering practices, are essentially being eroded extremely quickly. So one of the scientists, medical scientist, wanted to enlist the support of American religious evangelical groups in trying to tackle this climate change issue, because of course many people are embedded in those types of communities. They reject a lot of science. They reject the science of evolution, for instance. But I think because communities reject some aspects of science, it is still possible to talk to them about other issues. People on the whole are not fundamentally stupid, but they do have particular cultural alignments that sometimes make them stand out against an evidence-based view of the world. So he took a number of evangelical Christian leaders up to the north to talk to some of the Inuit. And the majority of them related very much to what they were hearing, and they said they would go back to their religious communities and talk about these issues and try and influence their congregations to take this whole issue of climate change seriously. A few, though, said, well, it's just the end time. Many religions, of course, have this prediction of the end time, and the end time, and there's nothing we can do about it. Now that's a very distressing sort of attitude to encounter. So that's why I think we have to have this broad discussion, this broad debate, because the issues facing us are global issues. They're not local issues. They're not issues that are local to India or to Australia or to the United States. the issue of climate change, particularly as a global issue, the issue of depletion of resources as a global issue, the whole issue to do with the supply of energy had an enormous political effect through the world. The focus around the oil-producing countries, for instance, and we can't just separate that out into issues of local economic advantage or local national identity. So we have to try to talk globally. Knowledge is important, education is important, education at every level. Educating women is enormously important. There are enormous challenges in front of us, and it's going to take everyone of goodwill, whether they come at things from a medical perspective, a basic science perspective, a political perspective, an economic perspective, or a religious perspective. It's going to take people of goodwill to work together.
So it's open to you for your questions.
Am I audible?
You were getting the red line?
Yes, while rest of you are thinking about what you would like to ask Professor Duarte, I had a question which actually reflects the question that is crossing the mind of the community at large, and certainly the medical community, which is with respect to the H1N1 pandemic, as we call it now. What would be your take on the future course of this pandemic, say, in the next 1 or 2 years, based on your experience?
This question could be interpreted as what the Americans call a Dorothy Dixer. You get someone to ask you a question that you that you know you can answer. Well, we don't know, of course, what exactly will happen. What's very interesting about this pandemic, what have we got here? Well, we've got a virus that seems to have come out of swine and back into the human population. It's called swine flu, not because it has little piggy ears or something. It's because it has genetic signatures that are characteristic of viruses that have been circulating in swine. It also has genetic signatures in its molecular sequence that are characteristics of viruses that circulate in humans and that circulate in birds. It is possible that this virus could be the descendant of the 1918 virus that caused the great pandemic, that went at some stage back into swine and then has come back out again into us. It's possible that it reflects some sort of recombination or reassociation event. Flu viruses have an 8-segmented genome. If you infect a cell with 2 different influenza viruses, those 8 segments from the 2 viruses can repackage. You get a repackaged virus. And so you can get bits switching over, say if a cell was infected with a virus that came out of a bird, and it might be a cell in a pig lung, and a cell was infected with a virus that came out of a human, and they happen to be together in the same cell in the lung of the pig, they can mix up, and you can get a reassortant virus out. So that could be what this virus is, and it could be that it's a reassortment between a swine virus that was circulating in pigs in Asia and a swine virus that was circulating in pigs in the United States or North America. How did they get together? Well, there's a lot of illegal movement of animals and so forth going on around the world, and you don't really know what goes on. For instance, the spread of the avian influenza virus south in the early 2000s and late 1990s in East Asia, vertically, was probably spread by people moving birds around illegally. Okay, so it's a virus that's come back into the human population, or has come new into the human population. We're not sure which. We have some genetic information about the 1918 virus. We have the sequence of the very virulent virus because people reconstructed it from formalin-fixed material by PCR and from going up into the permafrost and digging up people who died very quickly, and they still had live virus in them. They were put into frozen ground, and particularly if they were very fat, they preserved the virus. It's interesting that the swine flu virus is actually killing a lot of very fat people. It's severe in more obese people. But we don't know. What we don't know is the virus that was there before it. What we do know is that that flu, when it came across into humans, was initially a fairly relatively mild infection. Then it became a more severe infection with devastating consequences worldwide and a 2.5% mortality rate. So that's one of the things we're worried about with this virus. Same type of virus on H1N1. Is it going to change from being relatively mild, and in the main it is, to something that's more virulent? Now, the other thing to bear in mind is that this is the first pandemic strain that's come into human beings from outside, from animals, which is where these viruses always come from. They can come from birds, they can come from pigs. Potentially they could come from other species like horses, because horses are infected and so forth. Is this virus, this virus that's come across, is the first one we've seen come across in a big way and start to spread between humans since 1968. And of course the difference in technology between 1968 and 2008 is simply incredible. PCR technique, deep sequencing techniques, all sorts of rapid diagnostic and evaluation techniques, the type of diagnostic techniques that for instance, this company represents. So we have the opportunity to study a new pandemic from almost the outset and see where it goes, and we combine that with the fact that the global influenza surveillance network is probably the most